Boo. Feeling a bit down, a bit frustrated. I think I got the blues. So, yeah, I guess I'm gonna just talk a little bit about this Mr. Huff lesson. So, Mr. Huff, now that you've read the book or you've watched me read the book, which you better do if you haven't done it already, or I'll get you, is the great book Mr. Huff. And we've read it. It's a story about a boy named Bill and his, I guess, uh, friend, Mr. Huff. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You're going to help me break it down a little bit today. And it's not going to take too long. So this picture here is he couldn't find his favorite socks. They're being eaten by the dog. Oh no. And he spilt milk over his, he spilt the milk and his cereal was soggy. Oh no, tripped over his bag. And then he's kind of like giving up on the day. And this cloud up above him is getting bigger and bigger every time. And if you can see, there's like a little bit of a face happening. So on the previous slide, things weren't going well for Bill, were they? They were kind of going a bit down the drain, if you will. So what do you think the cloud growing over his head might represent? What do you think it might represent? This is about representations, and it'll all make sense in a minute. So what do you think that cloud growing over his head might represent? Now, one-word answers are not allowed. You have to write a sentence, at least, maybe two. It's quite complicated. It could be a few things. Emotions tend not to be one thing. They don't tend to be binary, meaning one or the other. They tend to be quite complicated. So, they might be, if you're angry, you also might be frustrated, and you might be sad, and you might be frustrated but happy. You can be that, or you can be sad and happy at the same time. Sometimes movies do that really well when they get you in the feels, but in a nice way. Okay, so Mr. Huff. Is Mr. Huff alive? Is Mr. Huff real? Where did Mr. Huff come from? So you can choose whether or not Mr. Huff is alive or not. In this story, he kind of seems like someone that the character can see. But whether or not he is he real? If he's not alive, then he can still be real if he's not alive. It can be. I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm not going to give you too many answers, but in my opinion, he's real. Yeah. And where did Mr. Huff come from? Mr. Huff, where did he come from? Where did he come from and why is he here? Good question, Mr. Bailey. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. All right, and Bill, have there ever been times that you have felt like Bill? Now, what has he been feeling? What does he feel? And in another way, what does Mr. Huff represent? So, have there been times that you have felt like Bill? And I'm going to write how here because I think that yes isn't an answer, no isn't an answer. I guarantee that everyone has felt something like this in their lifetime. Not necessarily exactly the same, but in the same, comparably the same. Is it hard to stay positive when things aren't going your way? Why? So, is it hard to stay positive when things aren't going your way? For me personally, sometimes it is. Sometimes I get a bit defeated and I just don't really I don't want to try and be positive anymore. I just sit there and think, oh man, things aren't going good. But other times, you know, hard things happen, things aren't good, but you still kind of can keep positive and stay on a good trajectory. So sometimes it depends on the day, depends on what you're going through. Is Mr. Huff a metaphor? So we've been learning about similes and metaphors. And the cool thing about similes and metaphors is that Similes are mostly written, but metaphors can be visual as well. A visual metaphor, which is making a comparison to something else or representing something visually, like Mr. Huff. Mr. Huff, he's that way. There he is. Mr. Huff, he is what I would call a visual metaphor, meaning that he's a visual comparison to something. And in this case, I think it's emotions. So I've written here, what emotion do you think Mr. Huff represents? But as we said before, emotions tend to be complicated. They're not usually just one or two things. It's usually like a few things. So what do you think? What emotions do you think Mr. Huff might represent? And tell us other characters that metaphorically represent emotions. Now, before you say there are none, there are heaps. There are heaps. Voldemort from Harry Potter represents evil. The Hulk from the MCU represents anger and rage and losing control. And Bruce Banner represents, trying to stay in control and having a burden of losing control sometimes, and managing aggression and managing emotions. And so that's that whole character's idea. If you look at someone like what's a character that everyone knows? I mean, I guess the MCU is a pretty good one, like Iron Man or Captain America. Like the metaphor for Captain America, his character, if you the traits you'd compare him to is honor, loyalty, all that sort of stuff. With Iron Man, it's sort of more about being a bit of an anti-hero, kind of doing his own thing. Um, fighting his own cause. He doesn't have to agree with anyone. He just does what he wants. So he's a bit more complicated, a bit more of a complicated character. And a lot of these characters have emotions attached to them. So in this case, the metaphor here is Mr. Huff is kind of an emotional metaphor, a character, a metaphor character, a comparison character. So you can feel something for them or feel similar to them. And the last slide, when you feel like Bill, what would you call your emotional cloud or character? Let's write that character. Tell us the name and what it would look like. Is it an animal? Is it a monster? Or is it something different? Get poetic. So just write a short little blurb, maybe a couple of sentences. I would name my sad, angry, frustrated character. Um, but not say any names. Gulliver. And Gulliver only comes out when I'm really, really upset, and he is a a little boy that's covered in oil and water, and he always just sits in the corner, slipping around, being annoying. And just always there in the back of my mind, like just constantly frustrating me until I forget about him and leave him behind. And then he comes back from time to time when I'm feeling frustrated and upset. So that's an example, and it's not a good example, but it's an example. So get poetic with this and write what you think. It shouldn't take too long. Honestly, these questions are really just there for you to think about it and kind of connect with the characters. There's no right or wrong answer. So, yeah, just tell us what you think. And yeah, have a great day. Hopefully, you don't have a cloud over you all day.